Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night. Our guest is Adam B. Coleman, not the apologist, where we'll be discussing conservatism and the
The
Democratic,
family.
yeah, in
All right.
relation to the black community.
Yeah. So, how are you doing, my good sir?
I'm doing well.
Yeah. So if so for the audience's sake, can you tell the audience a bit about yourself?
Sure. I am a writer. Um, I'm an IT guy by trade, but I have oddly transitioned into becoming a writer. I'm an author of a book called Black Victim to Black Victor. Um, I also found the Wrong Street Publishing, where we advocate for free speech. Um, we're getting more into the realm of book publishing besides my own book. Um, and also I am starting to dabble in writing. Coaching people for writing. Um, so yeah, I would say, but the number one thing for me is as a writer. I enjoy writing. I think it's a great form, uh, a great way to express yourself. And yeah, I think that's a quick description of myself.
Yeah. So, what actually got you into writing?
Um, well, it's kind of an odd path because the first thing I started writing was actually my book. And I think for other people, they might have different routes, but um, my first actual long form writing task was writing my book. Uh, took me about 9 months to completion and self-published it. But what got me into writing was actually feeling like I wasn't able to express myself, um, especially after the death of George Floyd, and the environment that we were living in. And I wasn't really on social media. I had a Facebook account, but I didn't really use it. But I knew that Facebook wasn't the place to do it. Um, I knew that it wouldn't be productive. It wouldn't go in the direction that I wanted it to go. Um, I started going into like free speech kind of forums, free speech websites, and just started asking questions and expressing how I felt. And it felt comforting to know that I wasn't alone in how I felt. And I got some encouragement to actually write because they liked how I expressed myself. And I was doing it in a long form. Um, and so kind of from there, I decided to, just sit down and write my book. And that's basically how it started.
Hmm. Yeah.
So much for diversity.
Hmm. Yeah. And a lot about your book is, you're talking about the importance of family and especially about having a father in the home, given your background.
Hmm.
Um, but what I think many people don't bring up is like the importance of childhood friends and how that can pull us in directions that our parents can't keep up with.
Hmm.
How important do you see it for people to properly vet people they associate with?
It's extremely important. Um, for me, my childhood was, looking back on it, I would say my childhood was highly inconsistent. We moved around a lot, lived in 4 different states before I was 18. And even within those states, we moved around. So I really don't have any real childhood friends. My oldest friend is from when I was in high school. Um, and a lot of people live in one area, to kind of have that connection. But usually your vetting process is a lot easier because you live in one area, you grow up around the same people, you know their families and things like that. But now with the internet, and people being more open to talking to people from different states, different countries, um, it's a little bit different because now you don't have that background. You don't have that kind of safety net of knowing their family history. All those things used to be really important. because things were more local. But now things are so distant, so everybody's kind of left to um, their own sensibilities as far as deciding who to get together with and talk to and trust. So it's a lot more complicated. This is why I think it's important to understand uh, psychology, just like basic psychology. Um, Trusting your instincts, looking at social cues. It's a lot harder for kids to understand this, but I think as you become an adult, with experience, but also with interest, your brain is more developed. You're more in tune with your environment. You can spot things a little bit easier. But this is also goes back to the importance of parents and especially fathers. Fathers usually kind of keep it real and say, "Hey, that person over there, look out for them. Look what they're doing." Because dads are usually kind of the protectors. And I kind of feel like we are the ones who keep it real with our kids. I know I keep it real with my son, and he tells me about a friend, and he says some story, and then I pick apart that story, and I say, "You need to watch out for this. You know, keep an eye out for that. He's dealing with girls. And say, look when this happens, when they do this. Here's a story. Let me tell you about this." So I think guidance from the adults, especially the parents, is extremely important for kids to understand the world around them because they don't have the experience that we do.
Hmm. Yeah, because a lot of times, especially if you don't have involved parents, because it's one thing to have parents, but they're not really involved.
Mm-hmm.
It can often be troubling because a lot of times what people fail to realize is that like your friend, like the company that you keep around you says a lot about yourself.
Right.
Like if you're hanging out with bad people all the time, even if you yourself are not bad, that does paint you as at least the very least a bad judge of character.
Yeah, that's definitely that. I would say that holds water most of the time. Um, Even if it's unfair, let's say someone was unfairly labeled as something, and you talk to them, um, you have no control over how people might see you. So it's ultimately still your decision. But as long as you're aware that this person has this label, are you willing to take that risk to damage your reputation? Um, are you worried about that thing? Because actually, it's interesting because I generally agree with that sentiment. Like, be careful of the people you hang out with. Usually, from like a moral standpoint, like highly immoral people, things like that. But I think we're also seeing this guilt by association politically. Um, you see it with Kanye West. Is a good example. Hanging out with Nick Fuentes. You see where they went to Donald Trump, and just because Nick Fuentes was there, Donald Trump doesn't even know who this guy is. All of a sudden, now he has the stink of Nick Fuentes onto Donald Trump. So there is this a little bit of guilt by association, even by association, kind of thing that's happening. So, but in the context of kids, I think that yes, in general, as a child, if you know that this kid is a knucklehead, don't hang out with them because they might drag you down. A lot of times they will. You need to disassociate from these people. I think it's generally good advice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I think that's also like I think a lot of conservatives really don't take that sort of factor into consideration because it's not just like the family unit is important, but if the family unit is not gearing children into associating with good people, it's
Mm-hmm.
not the family unit's not really going to be looking out in the kid's best interest.
No,
Because
absolutely.
you often hear in circumstances about like in some ghetto situations where yeah, a kid had both their mom and dad, but their mom and dad was pretty hands off and just let their kids get involved in gangs and whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
I mean, bad parenting is just as damaging as absent parenting. You
yeah,
know, it, I think that, especially when I talk about the nuclear family, the importance of it, I'm always speaking from the sense of a healthy nuclear family and a family that's involved.
mhm,
Um, and I think I have good faith when it comes to people when they discuss these things that they mean the same thing.
mhm,
Obviously, we wouldn't want kids to be in an abusive environment. We wouldn't say like, oh, parents, just as long as you live in the house, everything is fine. It's like, no, you
mhm,
being in the house is like the important structural format. But from there, you have to do the work. You have to be
mhm,
involved in your kids' lives. You have to listen to them. You have to talk to them. You have to give them
mhm,
guidance, things like that.
mhm.
But yeah, the nuclear family part, to me, whenever I say it, it is always about setting up that structural environment where you can have a conducive relationship with the kids.
Mhm. Yeah, and especially from your own background, you know, being a black person, obviously, there's a lot more discussion that and history that go behind the family structure and behind the family structure. What do you think maybe is a bit more unique that comes from, let's say, your background and let's say the background of black people in general?
What's unique about my experience in comparison to others, you mean?
Yeah.
Um, I mean, most people haven't been homeless. Most people haven't been homeless as kids.
Mhm,
Um, that's something that we had to deal with because my mom was on her own.
mhm,
We bounced around from place to place. Um, Sometimes it was because my mom was finding a new job. Sometimes it was because she was going back to school and she needed help. And she was asking other people to help, watch us while she was going back to nursing school. Um, so there's a multitude of reasons why, but yeah, definitely moving to excuse me, I can't talk, multiple states, along with being homeless is something that was relatively unique for us. The other thing is I've lived in a bunch of different types of environments. So I've lived in urban environment. I was born in Detroit. I've lived in suburban environments in different states. Um, and I've lived in rural environments, a relatively rural environment um, as well, and been around people of all different types of backgrounds, ethnicities. And I've been the extreme minority. One time when I was in one middle school, I was one of four black kids in the entire school. Um, and this was in the rural environment that I was living in New York. Um, so yeah, I think my background's a lot different than not just other black people, but just most people, because they haven't had these type of experiences.
well, yeah, and you know, you're more conservative, I believe, than what is traditional in the at least the modern black community.
I think it depends. The label of conservative seems like, this is in my opinion, but it feels like it's different than it was 10 years ago. Um,
True.
and so today, it's very interesting because I look back at, the things that I cared about when I would call myself a liberal, and much of those things I care about are still the same things that I care about. There's only a few things that I think that have changed. Number one, I am wholly pro-life. I'm actually extreme when it comes to the pro-life position, but I'm wholly pro-life, and there's multitude of reasons why I switched my position. But I was pro-choice at one point. Um,
Same.
but I am, the way I see myself is that I'm a moderate independent. I'm not a Republican. I'm not a rah-rah Republican. I didn't want to switch from one team to go to the other team. I actually just wanted to just think for myself. And so while I see it like today, Republicans are the party that makes the most sense. They have flaws. Democrats have a lot of flaws too. And so let me just stay in the middle and decide which way I want to cast my vote, and criticize both sides. You know, lately, I would say for the past 2-3 weeks, I've been criticizing the right, but I've been fair. I'm fair in my criticisms, and I criticize because I care. And I think I have a bunch of goals. One of my goals is to have people on the right, at least the ones who are following me, to understand that you can criticize your side because you actually care about your side. And, you know, I think that is a healthy thing to do. That's how you get better. But you can't be sycophants. You can't just pretend like, well, you know, it's different. No, it's not different.
Yeah.
I know what you mean. But more on that point, what do you make of the party switch response when you point out that the Democrats have gone back to their racist roots?
You know, I don't know. So I hear what you're saying, and I hear a lot of people say the same thing when it comes to the Democrats. They always bring up the KKK and stuff like that. But I also go back to where people say like when leftists try to make the argument, well, it was white people who enslaved black people. We'll simplify it that way. And I say to myself, well, those white people who enslaved black people 100 plus years ago, they're not alive today, and they have nothing to do with your neighbor. Your neighbor didn't enslave you. So why are we, you know, it's almost like the sins of the father pass along to the son. And so while I understand from like a party dynamic, the party of the KKK, can ideas be passed down? Sure, absolutely. That's why we should talk about these ideas and criticize these ideas. But I think that this sounds weird to say, but I don't think it's completely fair to hold that stink of the Democrat Party from 100 plus years ago, because the people have changed, society has changed. Now, what I will say, do bad ideas permeate in different parties? Absolutely. Nobody within the Democrat Party thinks enslaving black people is a good idea. They're not actually fighting for that, right? So the ideas change, they shift. Now, what do the outcomes look like? Are they bad outcomes? Then absolutely yes.
They do share sentiments with the Jim Crow. Like your races are inherently different. There's always this oppressed versus oppressor dynamic.
Yeah, and that's the thing. That's the progressive wing. More so in the progressive wing that is very race essentialist. And that actually, what you just said right there, that was probably the number one thing that pushed me away from the Democrats, is because they started taking over these particular mantras of the progressives, who were wholly race identitarians, where everything was predetermined because of what you look like. And I didn't like that. You know, when I was a Democrat, you know, in my head, you know, and just maybe I was being idealistic, but liberal values meant that you're allowed to live your life how you want, and no one can predetermine your existence. And when you start saying, well, Adam, as a black man, you have this experience, and this is the same experience as any other black person, and these are the things that you care about. It's like, well, where's the liberalism in that? And there is none. That's why I call these people illiberal. So the current stain on the Democrat Party is that they're not liberals. As far as like leadership goes, socially, they're not liberals. They're highly progressive, and that is a fair criticism of them when you say, hey, 100 plus years ago they were race essentialists. Now you guys are being race essentialists. That is a completely fair criticism.
Yeah,
And only
I
in the
mean,
90s that the conservatives were the moral Puritans, whereas the left wingers were the punk rock against the establishment and all that. And now they're all for censorship and political correctness.
Right, right,
Like
exactly.
what a party switch looks like in real time. That's it.
well,
Right.
a fun thing that people don't really like to bring up a lot is that, um, like, when it especially comes to like slavery and the like, um, what people actually don't realize is that in many ways, like when it comes to the black community, like people would say, "Oh, well, this is a holdout from slavery and stuff like that." And I'm saying, well, if you actually look at some of the statistics that go back then, like there were actually more, like a child in the black community was actually more likely to be in a home with their mother and father during slave times than they are currently now.
But there's
And I'm
Yeah.
like,
go ahead.
and I'm like, so are we so are we more racist than we were back then? I'm like, well, no, it has to be something with the culture.
And on a similar note, these Afrocentrists like to blame all the problems in African countries on colonialism that happened over 100 years ago during the scramble for Africa.
Yeah. And you don't even have to go as far back as slavery to talk about the nuclear family.
Mm-hmm.
The 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, um, you know, depending on what statistic you look like, it was either equal to percentage wise or more likely for black families to have two parents in the home, right? And I think wholly as a country, we were more nuclear family structured. I don't. It sounds weird to say we were more conservative, but we were more nuclear family structured. We didn't have no fault divorce. You know, there were social barriers when it came to degeneracy and things like that. And so we kind of kept things in check. Um, Obviously, people bring up, oh, well, you know, if a woman was being abused, she couldn't get out of the relationship and women couldn't vote. Outside
Well,
of those things, you know,
well, that was actually a lie as well, because there were like there were really two things really that could get you out of a marriage back then. If you
mhm,
could prove abuse happened, or if you could prove adultery happened. And people, funny enough, don't like to realize that it was actually the Republican Party under Reagan that actually pushed for no fault divorce.
mm. I see. I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah. Well, the reasoning that they gave for it, besides the whole women thing, is that they were saying, well, look, our current system is we're basically just having a bunch of people making up faults to get out of the marriage, and we're just having all these false accusations
Mhm.
levied at people just in order to get. So why don't we just get rid of it and make it like just make it no fault, so we don't have to keep clogging up the court system with faults? Which I could definitely see the argument in that sort of thing.
Mhm.
But I'm saying, like, what would have been better is like you maintained a bit of a fault system, whereas like it's not impossible to get out, but there's some, like I said, basically treat it like another contract. Like if, for example, if you sign up to do a job at a home, you say,
Mhm.
all right, I have this deadline that I have to do your house in, like to build your house. You're going to pay me this amount of money and the like. Now, if I stray or you stray from your commitments in this contract, there's a penalty that comes upon us. That doesn't mean you can't leave the contract for whatever reason. It just means if you do, there's a
Mhm.
penalty.
Right.
So I think
Yeah.
we could have been better off if we would have just seen it just sort of like that, For sure, you can leave for whatever reason you want, but there's a penalty that comes attached to that.
Yeah, I don't, theoretically, I don't have a problem with that. You know, sometimes the solution isn't to just get rid of it, it's to kind of modify it. And it sounds like they just went, well, the faults are too much, let's just get rid of it. And it's like, well, why don't you just improve it? Or why don't you streamline it? You know, that kind of thing. This is also part of the problem with government, because depending on who's in government, you know, you might get a really good idea, but often you get a really terrible idea. And it can highly affect the rest of society because of it.
Yeah. And so people don't often realize that it was a bit of a Republican idea for no-fault divorce to come into play. It's just been really the Democrats that have really picked up more and being on it from there.
Right. And like I said before, I didn't realize that either.
Yeah. Oops. So, yeah, and this is a common thing that, since you had brought up that you used to be a Democrat, a common question that would be asked is, if Democrat policies are so bad for Black people, then why are Black people still voting for them? Don't Black people not know their own self-interest?
Yes, actually they do. I always think that's a weird line that is used in politics. It's like, you don't know what your interests are. But there's a real reason why they vote Democrat, and there's two reasons, two big reasons. One is Republicans are racist. That narrative. It doesn't matter if they agree with a particular policy. Republicans are racist. So my interest is not to vote for racists. And so, you know, I can speak for myself. When I got into politics, that was how I was introduced. Republicans are racist, Democrats are for Black people. And from there, all your decision making, all your good faith or bad faith, depending on what party you're looking at, revolves around that singular thing, that moral sin of being racist. And if I hear a Republican say something, even if it sounds good, I'm like, no, there's something behind it. There's something nefarious behind it, and I can't listen to it, right? So I'm not even going to entertain it. You know, like they could say, listen, we accept Black people and we want to do what we can to help, and I could say, I don't believe them, right? Yeah. So once someone takes hold of that narrative, it's hard to get rid of it. Now, how do you eliminate that narrative? Exposure. The more people are exposed to different people who have different ideas, the better. There's something about the Republican Party where they've decided to succeed most urban areas. You talk to some people, they say, well, they don't care about the Black vote. Or they'll say something like that. Or they don't care about getting more Black people. It's not that. Like, the most logical thing is that in certain cities, there are Democrat strongholds. To spend millions upon millions of dollars to try and fight and win local elections to lose is not appealing. So they just don't do it. And so because they don't do it, that means that they don't campaign. Because they don't campaign, nobody knows what a Republican idea is. Nobody knows what's going on. It doesn't seem like they care. It doesn't seem like they're fighting for their vote. So why would they change that theory? You know, I think it's as simple as that. It's going to be incredibly hard to change that trajectory. I think Donald Trump was actually pretty successful on at least having people hear his message because he was a familiar voice. But overall, Donald Trump is labeled with Donald Trump is racist narrative. So that becomes another hurdle within itself. So,
well, do He has many terrible things, but racist is not one of them.
No, I don't think he is either. But that's the thing. Once narratives are created, once you're labeled as something, and especially about an entire group of people like Republicans or conservatives, it is extremely hard to get rid of that stain. I can speak for me because I used to believe it. It took for me to accidentally meet conservatives. It took for me to be open to hearing information. It took for me to be exposed to different people. And that happened because I was curious. Right. So some of it was by accident, some of it was curiosity. One thing might happen and then I became curious about it, and then maybe I'd get a book and listen and see what this particular person has to say. Then I would listen to that person's long form interview, and I said, holy shit, like this person makes a lot of sense. I was told this person was crazy. I was told this person's a racist. And I was like, so narratives are very, very strong once they're created, and they're extremely hard to get rid of. Especially if you're someone who just goes to work 9 to 5, you turn on the news for 10, 15 minutes, and they say Donald Trump does a racist thing again. Good people on both sides. And, you're like, I can't believe he said that. You turn off the TV and you keep it going, and the narrative is in your head. So it's incredibly hard. It takes a lot of curiosity to break from it. And most people don't have the time to.
Yeah.
It's also one of the many reasons why DeSantis is the better option for 2024 is because he knows how to handle the media, and the accusations against him don't stick, and he just doesn't.
Absolutely correct. Ron DeSantis, I've written this for the New York Post. I said I wrote a piece for the New York Post talking about, that Ron DeSantis is a better option for independents like myself than Donald Trump. And one of the reasons is Ron DeSantis is Trump-esque in how he reacts to the media, which means he doesn't care necessarily what the media has to say. He moves forward with the things that he wants to do, but he's actually savvier than Trump and a bunch of different things, like the culture war stuff that you can say like, oh, it's culture war. Why is he getting involved in that? But everybody gets involved with the culture war stuff, both sides.
I wouldn't say DeSantis is like that any more than Obama-esque, but he's his own person. Like he knows what time it is and how to govern and handle the media, and hits the left where it hurts.
Right. He knows how to govern. The big, I would say probably the biggest difference between the two is that Ron doesn't seek the cameras. And I don't think
he's more likely to attract the suburban women vote.
Yeah, I mean, you can go into all these different demographics, but I'm looking at like a wide range of qualities that he has that will attract all different types of people. Part of the reason the accusations against Ron doesn't stick is because they're using the same tactics that they would use for Trump, and it worked for Trump because Trump was his own worst enemy. Trump would do stuff that that would feed into the narrative that was being created. Trump, I would listen to Trump and I know what he's trying to say, but he's terrible at saying it, right? And it would just feed into the hatred, feed into all these different things, feed into the Trump deranger syndrome. And the difference is that Ron doesn't really speak. He lets Christina Pushaw, he lets other people speak, or he doesn't speak at all. When Donald Trump tried to call him all these names and everything, and the media finally got him in front of him, you know what he did? He smiled and he said, listen, in politics, people are going to come after you. That's what it is. He said, but look at my record. And he just kept it moving.
Way to do it.
And I'm like, that's how you do it. If it was the other way around, Trump would have been ranting and raving. And Trump doesn't understand, in politics, the more you speak, the more vulnerable you are. And Ron understands the less he speaks, the less vulnerable he is. And it all makes sense. And Trump is not nearly as savvy. Trump has a particular message. although at this point, I would say Trump is
It's,
kind of
it's about him, basically.
it's about him, but even more so, I say it like this. It's like when the Rolling Stones come into town, right? You know they're going to play the classics, right? That's all Trump is doing. All right, we're going to lock her up, right? Yeah, lock her up. Like he's just hitting the taglines. And I'm like, what new ideas does he have? What is he actually going to do? Because if we're being really honest, half the things that he said he was going to do, he didn't do. He said he was going to drain the swamp, and he didn't.
And he made it stronger.
He made it stronger. He hired some of them. Like Trump, overall, I would say Trump was a decent president, but Trump has flaws, right? Just like any other president. If Ron DeSantis becomes president, Ron DeSantis is going to make mistakes too. But we have to be able to criticize Trump fairly and say, hey, you said you were going to do X, Y, and Z. Now you're doing this. Why is that? And not make excuses for him. And that's what I'm seeing a lot on the right, as far as Trump is the savior of mankind, but the biggest victim in the world. It's like, which one is it?
Yeah. And personally, I would rather prefer Ron DeSantis stick to Florida for at least now, because I think he's doing a good job there. But I would personally like them to go for Ron Paul. Ron Paul's son, Rand, because I think he would be a better option because, for one, he has the fight the establishment mentality the same way Trump did. And he actually has more of a record to back it up because he did take on Fauci.
Yeah, that's speaking of Fauci. There's Fauci's Savior Mankind, Cuomo's Savior Mankind, Obama's the Savior Mankind on the left. Also, they have their messianic candidates, and they always end up making our lives worse.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the interesting thing about Rand Paul, for one, let me ask you guys: do you know someone who's kind of apolitical, doesn't really pay attention to politics?
Not really. Oh, my sister, but that's about it.
Do you think your sister knows who Rand Paul is?
I would imagine not.
And I think that's part of the problem. Ron DeSantis is probably the most known governor in the country. Part of the reason is because he's been the most attacked governor in the country by the media, so people at least know who he is. And so I think that definitely plays into it. Like, for people like us, we look at someone's record, we look at what they said. Oh, did you hear the soundbite? We're plugged in. And I'm trying to tell a lot of people, like, you don't understand that a lot of people aren't plugged in, right? A lot of people aren't paying attention to, like, that gaffe that Joe Biden said, right? A lot of people just go to work, come home, and turn on the TV for 15 minutes. They are, I hate to say this like in a condescending way, but they're low information voters, right? Yeah. But part of the reason is because, one, they're not really that interested in politics just in general. Two, they're busy. Like, I know when I was broke and struggling, I didn't really care about politics that much, you know? And so it's kind of a luxury to really kind of give a damn as far as paying attention on a daily basis or even a weekly basis as to the newest thing that's happening in the news, unless it's some sort of big event. But there are a lot of people, because they're low information voters, they vote like if they're meeting someone, right? This person seems nice. You hear the trope of, I could see myself having a beer with them, right? They say these things because they know nothing about them. And you would do the same thing if you were meeting someone off the street and you're just trying to get a feeling for them, a vibe about them. And you're like, I think I can trust this person based off of this limited information I have about them. But they don't have any idea what their record, the thing that they said, the gaffe, what they stood for, the policies that they pushed through. They have no idea. And so we have to kind of take that into the fact that, one, most people don't vote. Two, for the people who do vote, a lot of them vote party line. So they're part of the base already. So those people don't really matter as much. But there's a lot of people who are in the middle, like the independents, the sort of apoliticals, who might vote every so often. Um, those people are low information voters, and so you have to find a way to appeal to them in some sort of way. And one of those things is name recognition. Who has the most name recognition? And as much as, like, let's say if I agree with you that Rand Paul, policy-wise, fits everything, they would be like, who the hell is Rand Paul? I'm not
Yeah,
voting for
they
that
would
guy.
more remember his father, if anything.
If that.
Yeah.
If that. Like I think about my mom. My mom's not really political. If I went to my mom and asked her, does she know who Ron Paul is? I highly doubt she would know who the hell he is. And it would be the same thing for Rand Paul too.
That's one of
And
the
so,
that's
yeah,
one of the few advantages that DT has because he's been this celebrity since the 80s and 90s.
that is true. But that benefited him in 2016. And that's the other part now. The aura of the unknown, right? And it drives me crazy when someone says, well, Donald Trump's not a politician. The hell he isn't. He was the president for,
Of course, he's a politician.
yeah, of course
Yeah.
he's a politician, right? The aura of the unknown worked in 2016. We got to see him govern for 4 years, and he behind the scenes for the past was it been 2 years or so? He's been playing kingmaker, selecting candidates, endorsing people. The man is a politician, and so now we have to rate him as a politician, and that is a little bit different. It's a lot different to have the aura of the unknown to get people who might come out, who rarely come out, to come out and vote because of name recognition, because it sounds interesting, because they're like, I'm done with the people in DC. Let's get something different. Those people came out and vote and did that in 2016. We know who Donald Trump is.
I
And it's
bet
safe.
really if they
Mhm.
could, but they can't do it, but because of where he came from. But I would bet that if they could, they would run Arnold Schwarzenegger for president.
Well, they tried that on The Simpsons, but
I mean, they can't because he wasn't born in America. But I bet if they could figure out a way to get him in, they probably would.
oh yeah. And speaking of celebrities, how do you feel about Kanye running for president? Don't spit your drink now.
A complete joke. I don't even think Kanye could run a marathon, nevertheless presidency. Like, Kanye's not a serious person. That's one of the things that I've been trying to tell people. I was on a Twitter Spaces was 2 days ago, actually the same night that he left Timcast, and I'm listening to all these people, and I was able to speak, and I told them that, one of the things that people have to understand is that Kanye fits this description. A dead clock is right twice a day. And so sometimes Kanye says stuff that you agree with that seems to make sense. And then the rest of the time, he's incoherent. He doesn't make sense. He's all over the place. And then what happens is everybody focuses on the 2 times that he was right. And they're like, but Kanye's trying to warn us about Hollywood. Is he? Because have you heard the rest of the stuff that he says? So how does that jive with everything else that's going on? And I swear, like, some of these people sound like they're trying to say that Kanye is like this new thought leader. Just because the man is a good musician and a good he's a great creative type, but that doesn't always translate into every little thing that you do. And he's not, I don't want to say that he's crazy. I don't think that he's crazy. He is a creative type, and that's why he said it. I've listened to his interviews. He said, like, I have like 7 thoughts in my head all at once, right? And so because he has 7 thoughts in his head at once, when he tries to spit it out, it's incoherent. He's all over the place.
Being ADD.
Probably, but that really benefits him in the field that he's in, in creating and designing. It works for him. It benefits him, but Do we want that as a president? No. Like I can't take him seriously. I need someone who says, I want X, Y, and Z. And then when someone raises their hand and say, how would that work? You can tell me how that would work. He can't do that. He can't even have a simple sit down conversation with someone for an hour. Like his interview with Joe Rogan was the most awful interview to try and follow, completely all over the place.
You mean Lex Friedman?
And I actually didn't listen to that one. I didn't listen to that one. I did listen to his interview with Tucker Carlson. That was the most coherent one that I heard him do. And because he seemed calm. He seemed kind of calm. You could tell when he's amped up and excited, he's all over the place, but he seemed kind of calm. And I think that's why he
that morning.
I don't know because he sounds like I think I've heard him say, and this is part of the problem. He's so incoherent. He says one thing, and he may not be meaning it. I don't know, but I think he said that he stopped taking that stuff. Whatever stuff they were giving him, he stopped taking it. So he's free. You know, he can be himself, and he's completely free. So I don't know. I don't know if it was the effect of drugs or prescriptions or whatever that has messed with him, and now he's off it and he's all over the place. I have no idea, but he's not a presidential candidate whatsoever.
Yeah. Oh, also, this gets to a more larger point. Why do you think people like to emphasize the adjectives that can come before the word man, i.e., tall man, white man, black man, etc., when it comes to talking about problems rather than just admitting that men can have problems, period?
Why do people do that? I think there's a human element to where we search for group identity. And it's just a matter of understanding when it's appropriate to do so and when it's not. So, for example, I have no problem with nationalism. Like, that's a group identity. I'm an American. That's a group identity we're cool with. Sometimes racial identity isn't a bad thing. It just depends what it's about. But when it becomes everything, when it becomes the number one priority, when it becomes your whole self, I have a problem with that. Because I think it takes away from the individual. It takes away from the uniqueness about each person. And it basically erases that person's identity, or even like erases part of their culture that maybe is important. Like, I was thinking about this a while ago. Like, when we say white people, and I was thinking to myself, like, white people, that actually erases the cultural history for a lot of people, because white people could be Russian descent, Italian descent, Irish descent, and people have
German.
some pride. German, yeah, like there's some pride when it comes to that stuff from their grandparents, their great grandparents. Like, we care about our lineage, and all that stuff gets wiped away here for a racial context. And I think it's kind of sad. And it's not just white people that happens to, and I'm saying it, I'm saying the word, but like, it's not just them, but it's everybody, Hispanics, like, Hispanic is just Hispanic, Mexican, Cuban, doesn't matter, Hispanic, like, everything just kind of gets erased by the racial notes.
Yeah, and it's the same with the Indians. They have like over 400 some tribes, and they're all homogenized into Native American.
Yeah, exactly. So it's why do we have to do it? Because humans always do it. We always find some sort of group identity. We always find some sort of association. Like, when I travel abroad and I meet another American, I'm like, oh, where are you from? Like, I feel some sort of group association, because now we're foreigners in another place, and we have, we're both from the same country. So
But
all of a sudden,
there is some truth to that. Like, a non-Asian
Yeah.
with the Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Thai, or Taiwanese, and like be confused as to what they actually are. They would always
Yeah.
be. It would always be assumed to be Chinese or Japanese.
Yeah, it's I think that's also part because they're very small demographics, and a lot of people don't know much about them, especially in the United States. Um, but yeah, I think just in general, humans look for a group identity all the time, and sometimes it's actually good. That's how we can be cohesive. That's why I say nationalism. I would say the vast majority of the time is actually a good thing. Um, But sometimes group identity isn't a good thing because it creates a line of division, and it puts that group identity over everything else all the time, always, and it takes away from the people down below.
Yeah. Mhm. What made you actually want to write a book, and what was the most challenging part in the process of writing it?
Me writing the book was purely about expressing myself and also leaving something behind for my son. Um, I was I had wanted to write a book a couple years prior, but I didn't know what to write about. But I was thinking about the legacy I wanted to leave for my son. Um, so I figured a book was something that I could leave for my son. Um, but the wanting to, excuse me, the wanting to express myself was like the driving force because I felt frustrated. I felt like I couldn't speak, and I felt like I had a lot to say, and I wanted to put it down. So that was the number one thing. I had no expectations as far as anybody listening to it, if anybody wanted to buy it or anything like that. My 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 number one goal was to express myself and to put out a message that I thought people would want to hear, possibly. And thankfully, people do want to hear, and people actually like the book, and they're taking something from it. Um, what was your other question you asked?
Well, basically, it is what was the most challenging part in writing it?
Oh, the most challenging part, the editing. Editing is
Mm.
always the most challenging part because you're like you spend all this time writing and writing and writing. You're like, I'm done, and then you got to edit it, and so you're just like, oh man, I just want to publish it. It was probably like a month or so of editing, and it was like a painstaking because you want to be done with it.
Yeah.
Don't don't you get an editor?
So yes, um, it depends on how you want to do it. Everybody's a little bit different, but I tried to get an editor. I had somebody lined up, and by that time I kind of had like a deadline when I wanted to be done. So I had somebody lined up, and they completely flaked on me. I haven't heard from them since, um, and so it kind of left me in a bind. So then she was my fiance at the time, but my wife, we basically just edited the book ourselves, and we went over it and over and over it, and did the best we could to kind of edit it to meet the deadline. And I think we did a great job. There haven't been really any complaints. I know that there's a couple of errors as far as like using the wrong word. Um, but other than that, it doesn't take from the book. It doesn't seem like a shoddy work or anything like that.
Yeah. Um, yeah. So you bring up the victimhood culture in the United States a lot in your work.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that I've actually been when I go through history and in Western history. And I was wondering your take on this. Do you think a possible reason for why victimhood culture is so popular in the United States is due to the popularity of Christianity in the West as it was? There has long been a long tradition of Christians in the West trying to make themselves victims to be more like Christ. Do you think
Mm-hmm.
now might just be another sort of manifestation of that, but in a toxic direction?
Um, Actually, I've never thought about the Christian angle. Um, I think it comes down to it's part of human nature in some respects. It's within us to do. Sometimes we do it, we don't even realize that we're doing it. Like I just wrote an article about Kanye West, similar to what we were talking about before, but I say quit acting like Kanye's savior. He's not a victim. And the point of me saying that is Kanye knew that he was going to be touching on something that is a third rail, right? So it's not even a context of whether he was right or wrong about the Jew stuff, but he knew that it was a third rail kind of thing. So he knew that people would be pissed off. That's why he said, I'm about to go DEFCON 3, right? Because he knew that it was going to evoke a reaction. So the consequences that come from it are the consequences that come from it. Like I'm not for cancel culture, but like we know what happens. You know, it's like hitting a bear in the face with a stick and then being mad that the bear bit you, and then like everybody knows, like you keep doing that, the bear's going to bite you, and that's what happened to Kanye. And now he's acting like the victim. I can't believe this is being done to me. Meanwhile, you just got done saying the most powerful people in the world. That's the craziest part. He's saying the most powerful people in the world. I'm about to point them out. Oh my God, the most powerful people in the world got me. Like that's essentially what he's doing. You know, so he's poking the bear and then screaming about it. And then everybody acts like his savior, saying, I can't believe this is happening to him. We need to do something about this. But he did it to himself. Like in life, you take certain risks, you say certain things. Like when I wrote my book, I knew that there were certain risks of saying certain things that I'm saying, that someone might interpret it in a particular way and not like it. And I was prepared for that reaction. I was prepared for if my job might not like it, that they might fire me. I was prepared for that. Like I'm aware of the circumstances that come with certain things in our society, whether I like it or not. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he bet that nothing would happen, and he bet wrong. Like he knew it was a risk. So he's not a victim in my eyes. I don't like that he got debanked. I don't like the response to it. I am anti-cancel culture, but it exists. Like we know this. He's not an idiot. He knows this. And
although I will say there is a funny joke that does come out of it. Mm-hmm. Basically, he says the Jews run all the banks, and then he gets debanked.
Right. Like it is funny, but you know, to the main point of victimhood culture exists in all different types of ways. Some are worse than others, some are more obvious than others. You know, like if you're into sports, your favorite team, you know, if the referee gives them the wrong call, oh, I can't believe they did that to them. Oh, we would have won that game if it wasn't for the ref. Like you're treating them like victims of the game, but in reality, they sucked. Yeah. Like we all do that. We do it to a degree. Sometimes we treat people that we like victims because we want to save them. We want to feel like we can emotionally rescue them, right? And sometimes, like in a context of sport team, like it doesn't matter. Like you could feel that way. It doesn't really change anything. It doesn't affect anything. But in the world of politics, in the world of social dynamics, real people that you have to deal with, like that kind of way of thinking is actually harmful. It doesn't help. It doesn't help at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there's the education system is also another issue. Like, how come? Like, I just thought this the other day. Why do you think it's only this from slavery up until civil rights that Black history is being taught, rather than these great African kingdoms beforehand, and figures like Mansa Musa, Zinga, and Shaka Zulu?
Why aren't they being? You mean like why aren't those figures being taught within the public schools?
Yeah, like African history in general, not just not just Black history, because it just seems so demoralizing, don't you think?
Well, let me ask you this. Do you know all the Russian rulers?
Not all of them.
I mean, do kids learn about Russian rulers? Do kids learn about Cambodian, history? Like, there's a ton of stuff that we don't learn within schools about all different types of places around the world.
Sort of betrays when you learn about a particular race's history. You just learn all about oppression and none of the stuff that made them great, like Indians. Also, another example.
Yeah, I mean, well, listen. Sometimes, to me, it's not necessarily about the event that happened. Like for me, the civil rights era was an overall positive, and there are things that you can take from it that were overall positive. It's just how you look at it. Slavery can be taught from a way of people who overcame a terrible situation, rather than them being oppressed by white people and white enslavers.
It's always taught one way, rather than
Yeah,
white people were also enslaved by Africans at certain points in history and by the Turks.
yeah, right. I know when I was in school. Yeah, when I was in high school, it never felt political when we talked about these topics. It felt matter of fact. It's like on this day this happened, on this day this happened. And granted, I'm 38, so I graduated high school in 2002. Times were a little bit different, but even back then, it didn't, like the teachers that I had when we would talk about these things. It was pretty matter of fact. I don't know. Like here's the thing. I hear from Black people who get upset because when they went to college, they learned about things, and they always say like, "Why didn't I learn about this in school?" I'm like, "Well, you're not supposed to learn everything in school. Like your public school education is to give you a balance of information, so then you can go to college. That's where you're supposed to, where you're actually learning this shit from. That's where you're supposed to learn it from." you know
Yeah.
so that's kind of how I think about the entire thing as far as what we learn. But yeah, you're supposed to get the basics. It's supposed to be in preparation for higher learning, in preparation for trade school, at least to give you the basics of information to prepare you for the rest of the world.
Mhm.
Good point.
Yeah. Well, we came up on the hour mark. Is there any questions that you would like to ask Adam Coleman, Carlos?
We got mine covered.
All right, cool. And I got mine covered too. Yeah, I had a lot of fun doing this. It was nice having
Yeah,
you on, Adam.
likewise.
Um,
I appreciate the conversation.
And tell the dear
uh,
audience where to find you.
I feel like all over the place. I'm the most active on Twitter. Oh, what's that?
like Kanye West.
Without the private plane. Now you can find me on Twitter. For the most part, I'm the most active there at wrong_speak. Definitely check out my Substack. It's adambcoleman.substack.com. Also check out Wrong Speak Substack, wrongspeak.substack.com. I will be at America Fest this December, to support and sell some books and sign them for Wrong Speak and publicize Wrong Speak. But in general, I'm all over the place. Just look for Adam B. Coleman on Google. Check out Wrong Speak, and if anybody wants to write for Wrong Speak, definitely reach out.
Mm-hmm.
All right. See you next time.
All right.